Office Excel 2019, we're going to get you familiar with the Excel spreadsheet program. We'll start by looking at getting started with Excel 2019, understanding how to navigate the user interface and use various commands, creating and saving basic workbooks, as well as entering cell data and using the help system. Then we'll look at performing calculations like formulas and functions, how to create them, how to insert them into worksheets, and how to reuse them. Then we'll look at modifying a worksheet. You don't always start out brand new. You might work with somebody else's information. So how do we insert information? How do we delete? How do we search and replace for data? How do we do spell checks? We'll talk about some formatting like text, number, currency formats, aligning cell contents, utilizing styles and themes, and applying basic conditional formatting. Sometimes you might need to print your spreadsheets. We'll look at printing those workbooks. We'll also look at managing workbooks, such as the names of the individual worksheets, the order, managing the properties, and such. We'll follow that up with some adding borders and colors to worksheets to enhance the visual appeal of those worksheets, and utilizing the Excel options for basic Excel customization. With all of this, we are going to get you more familiar and ready to work with Excel 2019 on a daily basis. Hi, and welcome to the video courses for the Microsoft Office 2019 suite of applications. My name is Patrick Lohner, and I'm going to be your instructor on these courses. I want to start just with a little bit about my background. I've been in the IT industry for about 20 years, working as a Microsoft certified trainer and a Microsoft certified systems engineer. Now, in large part, my background is in the IT industry. So I work with servers, I work with networks, but I also work with applications. I've been using the Office suite of programs since way back in the days of Office 97. I'm familiar and well-versed with each individual version, including Office 2019. I've worked with the programs of Outlook and Excel and Word and PowerPoint on a daily basis. Sometimes that's in end-user support, and in other cases, it's actually utilizing those programs to perform the various functions that they perform. I'm confident that I can portray some of that knowledge to you and get you familiar with this brand new version of Office, that being version 2019. So I'm excited about being your instructor. I hope you're excited to be here and listening to these courses, and I hope you will greatly benefit from them. That being said, we have a lot to cover. Let's get started. In this first chapter, we're going to look at getting started with the Microsoft Office Excel 2019 program. Excel is a program that is used in virtually every business in some form, whether it's tracking inventory, keeping track of accounting data, or any other use for numbers that you can think of. Excel is the program that we can use to create spreadsheets, combine those spreadsheets into workbooks, perform calculations on the numbers, display these values in different ways like bars, bar charts, and graphs. It is a program that really is the centerpiece of the Office suite when it comes to this kind of data input and analysis. But in order to get there, in order to understand that, we have to be familiar with the terms. We have to be familiar with the interface itself, how to use various Excel commands to make Excel do a lot of work for us. We have to understand what a workbook is and how to create it and save it, enter data into the individual cells, the rows, the columns. We need to understand all of those fundamentals. We also need to understand that we're not going to necessarily know the answer to every single question. So in those situations, we are going to need some help. And thankfully, Office does have an extensive help system built into it. All of the Office programs, and Excel is no different. So we'll look at how to use help to get the information that you need when you need it. Now, in this first topic, we're just going to start with navigating the Excel user interface, because there's nothing more frustrating than opening up a program and having to look all over the place to find what you need. Okay? Or, I suppose there might be something worse, and that would be opening a program and having no idea what you're looking at. And so we don't want to do that. In this first topic, we're just going to get a feel for the Excel 2019 interface. Let's start with some terms and just understand Excel as a whole. As we've said, it's part of the Office 2019 suite of user productivity software. Well, where exactly does Excel fit into that? It's a spreadsheet program. It lets you store data, present data, manipulate data, analyze data. It provides all of that functionality for you, and it does actually provide a lot of intelligence, and you can use that intelligence as actionable intelligence within your organization. It is comprised of spreadsheets. The spreadsheets are the individual components of Excel as a whole. It's a paper, it's an electronic document, it's arranged in a tabular form. And we use that spreadsheet to store data, to manipulate data, and to analyze it. Worksheets are electronic spreadsheets that are using for entering, storing, and analyzing data in Excel. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that a spreadsheet could actually be a paper document. A worksheet in Excel is always going to be an electronic version of that document. So we technically do call them worksheets, although you'll hear me using the term spreadsheet frequently. A workbook is an Excel file that is just a container. It stores all the related Excel worksheets within it. You can link to data in different worksheets within a workbook. You can technically link to worksheets outside of this workbook. So it's a sub-container, if you will, that really just stores everything. This is an example of an Excel window, and in this Excel window we can see a couple of things. First of all, the name of the workbook is across the top, the title bar of that window. And then down on the bottom left you see that there are multiple worksheets. They are named Sheet 1, Sheet 2, Sheet 3, respectively. The selected worksheet should be obvious because the other two are grayed out. This one is sort of highlighted with its font in a different color, so that's the worksheet that you're currently looking at. The data above it is going to be the data that is actually in that worksheet. So that brings us to another term, and that term is a cell. A cell is an individual container that you use to input and store data. So each cell can contain data. And that data can be of different types. So, for instance, we have cells that, in this spreadsheet, that contain textual data, strings. We have other cells that contain numeric values, integers. And even there, of course, we have multiple subtypes of those that can be entered. So, but the cell is that individual unit of data. A cell has an address, and that address corresponds to the number of the row and the letter that is associated with the column. Okay, so the individual cell that we have there is column C and row 2, so we would call that cell C2. A range is a contiguous range or group of cells that typically contains related data. So in this spreadsheet we can see it appears to maybe have sales data or some type of data that is identified with a particular employee in a particular region. All right, so there's parts of this spreadsheet that are different, but underneath the quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 headings, we have a range because this is where all of the numeric values are. They're all the same, or they're all the same data type, within that range. Now, what I was referring to before was the cell reference. The cell reference is the row header and the column header, which identify the cell at the intersection of the row and the column. Okay, so D3, you could either go to column D and go down to row 3, or you could go to row 3 and go over to column D. It really doesn't matter. D3 represents that particular intersection of row and column. So if that's a struggle for you to remember, just think of columns. And what do we typically think of when we think of columns? We think of those elements that are going vertical. We may be drawn to old Roman architecture, the big columns, or houses that have columns out in the front. We know what a column is. So column is vertical, row is going to be horizontal. And the cell reference is the actual term that's used to describe a particular cell. A range reference is going to have two cell references. They're going to be separated by a colon, and they represent the cells at the top left and the bottom right. So top left corner, bottom right corner. In this case, for our numeric data, what's selected currently, it starts at cell D2 on the top left, and it ends at cell F6 on the bottom right. So that is that range of cells. So let's take a look now at the general Excel UI, or user interface. A user interface is just how you as a user interact with a particular program. So it's just kind of a technical term. You might not call it that yourself, but it's what you're looking at. This is actually what we refer to as a graphical user interface, because we can point and click and move items. We can use a mouse and a keyboard in order to interface with it. Okay, so let's talk about just these terms. These are going to be terms that we use later, and we need everybody to be on the same page as to what these terms actually mean. So on the top left of the Excel user interface, you have what's called the Quick Access Toolbar. Now, initially, there's not going to be a whole lot on the Quick Access Toolbar. You can actually add as much to it as you want. It's going to be completely up to you. Okay, you can customize it, and I'll show you how to do that, to add other items, other commands that you frequently are going to access. Right? Quick access, frequent access. That's what you need to put there. The title bar just tells you the name of the program, Excel, and the name of the current document. If you don't have a document saved, that title bar is just going to say book 1 or possibly 2, 3, 4, 5 if you have multiple unsaved worksheets open. Side note, probably don't want to do that, right? But once we save it, then that would, instead of say book 1, say the name of our workbook. Directly beneath that, you have the ribbon. Now, ribbon is the replacement for the toolbar in much older versions of Office. The idea of the ribbon was that it placed these commands in a way that they were visible to you. So as opposed to hunting through toolbars, you simply have to hit the tabs on the ribbon, home, insert, page layout, etc. And then you're going to see those commands available to you. Okay? Pasting, formatting painter, changing the font in this case, changing the alignment, the data types. And then each of those tabs are going to have their own set of commands. There will be much more on that later, and you can even customize the ribbon to suit your own needs. Then down below, we have the status bar. Okay, the status bar just displays many conditions, really, that might be pertinent to Excel. So the mode of the particular cell that you happen to be in. It can tell us that caps lock or no lock is enabled. You can even customize information there as well. And over on the bottom right, you have the view and zoom controls. Those are going to provide you with quick access to commands that change the view. All right, so we can zoom in and zoom out, and then we can also modify the actual display. Those are your basic parts of the Excel UI. Now we have workbook and worksheet UI elements as well, so this has to do with that area in the middle. Stuck at the top and the bottom. The inner part displays this. Okay, so we can see the Select All button there on the top left. If you use the Select All button, it is going to select everything in your worksheet. All right? So that's a quick and easy way to select all data. And you're probably not going to do that on a very large worksheet, but if you have something that's just, say, A1 through L15, that range reference, then you might just, okay, I want to grab all of this because I'm going to maybe copy out and put it in another worksheet. Now, I actually skipped something. Directly above that is the name box. The name box is actually showing you the cell reference or the range reference. You can use the name box to type in another range. So instead of clicking and dragging, which is one way to select a range of cells, another way is just to type the range into that name box. You also have the formula bar. Now, we're going to talk about the formula bar a lot more later. It technically just displays the contents of the current cell. However, instead of just putting static data in there, in the formula box, we can use functions, and we can have it perform calculations. So for instance, instead of just saying 50, I can say, I want you to add the contents of A1 and B1. All right, and there's going to be a particular way in which we will do that, and we will talk about that later. Across the top, then you have the column headers; those are letters. Across or down the left-hand side, you have the row headers; those are numbers. The worksheet tab navigation controls are down on the bottom left. You can use that just to navigate between the worksheets. Those are just arrows, essentially, that'll let you go from sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. You can also click on the tabs, and then you see a little plus sign there that will allow me to create a new sheet button. The scroll bars are on they are both horizontal and vertical. This is going to depend on the size of your spreadsheet. So right now there's not a lot of places to scroll, but as we begin to add rows or as we begin to add columns or both, then those scroll bars are going to give us the ability to move around in the worksheet. The window commands in Excel, just like any other Office program, are going to be in the top right. These are going to allow us to move the window around so it better fits on our screen. Some of us are going to have large monitors, others small. Some of us might have multiple monitors. We can actually move the application between or from monitor 1 to monitor 2. Okay, so the options here are going to be the same really as any other program. Starting from the right, we have the ability to close. We need to have saved it, or we will be prompted to do so. We have the ability to maximize, which takes up the full monitor screen. Minimize, which minimizes it all the way down into the taskbar. Now, the maximize is also the restore down button. So once you've maximized, if you click it again, it'll restore it to the original size of that window. And then we are able to resize these windows, of course, with our mouse if we need to. The ribbon display options button is there. That's just if you want to hide the ribbon. Some of these things are going to be a little easier when we go through some demonstrations. Across the top of the ribbon, there are several tabs. One of them is the File tab. When you click on the File tab, you are getting what's called the Backstage view. And the Backstage view gives you various options that are global to Excel, info about the files, the ability to save, to print, to share, to export, to publish to the web. There are all kinds of things that are available, of course, within that Backstage view. And so we'll look at a number of those things as we go through. Or down the left-hand side, I should say, we have tabs and commands. This is just technically called the left pane and the right pane. So when you click on an individual tab, then you will see all of the options that are available to you on or as part of the right pane. As with other Office applications, in Excel you have a number of options for doing the same thing. There's no difference, when you're navigating worksheets and workbooks, whether you use a keyboard shortcut, a mouse click, or a ribbon option. But it's nice to be aware that they all exist. There are always 3 or 4 different ways to do the same thing, and that can get confusing when you're just starting to use a program, but it can actually be pretty helpful down the road. So I won't do it all the time, but occasionally I'll tell you, hey, there's another way to do this. There's a keyboard shortcut, or you can click here, or you can click up here, and it's going to do the same thing. All right, and I'll try not to do that too much because, like I said, it does get confusing, and it's one of those things that more as you use the program, you just kind of realize, oh, there are other things. I use computers a lot. I love keyboard shortcuts because they make me more efficient. So I have a tendency to tell you about some of those, and hopefully that'll be helpful. Right now we're just talking about mouse navigation. So you want to use the mouse to point and click. We said you could do that on a graphical user interface. If you want to select a particular cell, then you just click on it. If you click on it, it will become the desired cell. If you want to click arrange, then you have to left click, hold the left mouse button, and then drag to select the desired range. For an entire row or column, you just actually have to click the header. Row number or the column header, you can do that. To move the worksheet display up and down, you can use one of the vertical scroll arrows. If you want to use it left and right, the horizontal scroll arrows. This is with your mouse. Okay, to move the display more than one row or column at a time, we can click and drag the vertical scroll bar. So you can click the little arrow at the bottom, and that'll just move it down one row at a time. But if you click and drag, then you can move at a greater pace. The worksheet, one display at a time. On the vertical scroll bar, we're going to just select the area between the scroll bar and the desired directions scroll arrow. That's a confusing way of saying that, but I'll show you how to do that. Display a different worksheet, we just want to click on that particular worksheet tab. Where your mouse cursor is going to depend on, or is going to determine, I should say, the icon. And the icons mean different things. So if you have an arrow icon, that's usually when you're going through the ribbon tabs, the commands, the quick access toolbar, the zoom controls. You just click on something, it'll perform whatever action that button is supposed to do. All right. If you have it at the edge of a cell or range of cells, you're going to get the crosshairs, and that allows you to actually left click and drag either vertically or horizontally, and you can move the data by doing that. Okay? That's a little different than the vertical bar with two arrows to the left and right. That is placed between column headers and lets you resize, and then you have that kind of flipped around if you're in rows. If you've got the target, you're grabbing that and you're going to move that data out of that cell. If you have the larger, fatter cross, if you want to call it that, placed over a cell in a worksheet, that'll select the individual cell. You can drag that to do a range, so that's just in the data portion of the worksheet. Your bar there that looks like an eye, if it's in the active cell, or the formula bar, or various text boxes, that's going to allow you to select the text inside of a text box. Okay, and then I could type data into it. The simple cross there, placed at the bottom right-hand corner of a cell or a range of cells, allows you to drag vertically or horizontally to copy or autofill, and we'll discuss exactly what that means. There's some keyboard navigation too. Just go through a few of these quickly, moving up and down with your arrows, left and right. Pressing the home key will get you to column A of the current row. The control key plus up down will move to the first or last column or row that actually has data in it. You can use page up, page down. You can use alt page up. That'll go screen left or right instead of vertically. Moving a cell to the right, we can use the tab command. We can use shift to select multiple cells instead of using the mouse. Shift enter goes up. Control home goes to cell A1. You can see these are keyboard shortcuts, and they can be very useful. It's going to take us some time to probably get all of that down. The cell is the term that Excel uses for a single area that we can enter data into, and the active cell is the term that we would talk about in reference to the current cell. Okay, so there are many cells, and they all have a reference, but the active cell is the one that you actually have selected, meaning that you are ready to put data into it. Okay, so in order to put data into a cell, you have to first make it the active cell, and you do that by selecting it. It'll then be displayed with a solid green border, so it tells you that that's the one that you have selected, and as you might imagine, there can only be one active cell. When you even select a range, there's still only one active cell. That cell will be the one that is displayed without the shaded background. So as we click and we drag and we have a range of cells, we will have one of those cells that does not have shaded background. Now, there are technically three modes when you're interacting with cells in the worksheet, and you can see the active mode cell by looking at the bottom left-hand corner of your window. You'll see the word either ready, enter, or edit. Right? It just depends on what you're doing. Ready mode just tells you it's selected and it's waiting for you to interact with it. Edit means that you are actually currently editing the cell. Okay, that means you can enter things into it, and then enter mode activates once you start typing. So it's very much a rapid succession on these, and probably not something that you will really be looking at but it is down there on the bottom left, and that's what that means. There are a couple of ways to enter data into cells in a worksheet. You can either do it directly into the active cell, or you can do it using edit mode. The active cell entry is really the most basic method. I'm going to select the cell, and then I'm going to type the data. If I press tab, that's going to move me one cell to the right. If I press enter, it's going to move me one cell down. You can also use edit mode, though, to enter new data into an empty cell or edit existing data, and that's more useful when I'm actually editing data. So all I would do is go double-click the desired cell, and then take my mouse and go and put it up into the formula bar. All right. Once I'm in the formula bar, then I can edit the existing data that's there. So double-click it to make it active, then go up to the formula bar, and you will be able to modify the data that is in that cell. So that's kind of enough here at the start for us getting in and just examining the general interface. We're going to take a look at this in the form of a demonstration. In this demonstration, we're going to look at just some simple navigation of the Excel user interface. As you can see here, we do have Excel opened up, and it is displaying a file. And so across the top, we can see, quick access toolbar. We can see the title of the file, the Devilitech Holiday Schedule. We've got my name, it's what this version of Office is registered to, and then we have our minimize, restore down, and close buttons. Okay. If you have the need to open a workbook, then you would just you can open up Excel by itself just by clicking here in Windows 10, and then when the start menu goes up, then we just type in Excel. All right. And then Excel will open. It's taking a minute there to search for whatever reason. Excel would open. We can also pin Excel once it's open down to the taskbar by right-clicking and just saying that we would like to pin to taskbar. Okay, so those are different options there. All right, so let's just kind of navigate through here. Across the top, we have the different tabs on the ribbon. So the Home tab is the tab that is selected by default. You can see the command groupings, so the word down here at the bottom is the command group, and then individual commands within that group. Some of these command groups will have a dialog box launcher, and so when you click on that, it will open up a separate dialog box, which will provide you with more options that are available in that particular area, just more than what is available within the ribbon. So as you select, they don't necessarily look like tabs, but when you select these different tabs, then you see different sets of groups. So insert is all about inserting things. Page layouts has to do with margins, orientations, grid lines, headers, how stuff is displayed. Formulas, we'll spend a lot of time in the next couple levels dealing with formulas and functions. Data sets, and linking to existing data sets, querying, sorting, filtering. Reviewing is where you're going to have your collaboration tools that Excel has. Okay, so you have all of those different options. Following that, you have the file. And when you click on file, this is what we call the backstage view. This is how you can get into the kind of global Excel options. So you click on options and it opens up the options dialog box. But notice down the left-hand side, there are a number of different tabs. Info has several things within it. Save is just dealing with save, so that just takes you to where it just saves it in the case of an existing file. Save as would say what do you want to save it as. Print, share, export, publish. These are all different tabs, which will then provide us with different options or just launch their own dialog box. So now what we can do is we'll select a cell here, so cell A1, and we're going to notice just a couple of things. Notice first it's displayed with a solid green border there, and in the name box you have A1 that's being displayed. Okay. The actual contents of that cell are going to show up in the formula bar, which is right here. So it says day because that's the value. Change this to some other value, then it's going to change the value, and you can see it changing up in the formula bar. All right, if I want to select C10, I'm going to go to column C, row 10, select that value. Now notice C10 is displayed, and Christmas, which is the actual value of that cell, is displayed as well. Okay, now let's say I want to select multiple values. Well, if I left-click the mouse on A1 and drag it down, notice the green box now selects that entire range of cells. A1 is still going to appear here, and day is still going to appear in the formula bar just because that's the first cell that is selected. Okay. Now you can also move between cells with your keyboard. So I can go back to A1 and press Enter, and now A2 and its value will be selected. You can also press the down arrow in order to do that, or you can press the right and left arrows to cycle that way. Okay. So those are your different options there. We can select multiple ranges simultaneously. So here's A2 on Wednesday, and then press, or then hold down the Shift key, excuse me. So this is using the keyboard again. I'm going to go down to A10, hold down Shift, left click again, and it highlights everything. Now, as opposed to doing that, we can hold down Control. So Control instead of Shift, and now it's going to select only those cells that I actually want to select. Okay? And we can do that in a couple different ways. We can click and drag here so it's all of row A2, and then I can hold down Control and click and drag on A10, and now I have both of those cell ranges selected. Going back to A1, as we said, the down arrows and right arrows, and we can navigate in that way. So we can navigate entirely using the keyboard, or we can navigate using the mouse, or a mixture of both. One other thing here, if I do hit Enter to go down, Shift Enter is going to go back up. Okay, so now I'm at A2, and now I'm back up to A1. If I hit Tab, that's the other keyboard option to go to the right, and Shift Tab will go back to the left. So that's just a demonstration on some simple navigation of the Excel user interface. In this next topic, we're going to be looking at using Excel commands. So at this point, we've navigated our way around the Excel environment. We've entered some basic cell data. And so we're ready to take advantage, or start to take advantage, of the wide array of functionality that Excel 2019 has to offer. But first, we have to know what the commands are and how to find those commands. So the ribbon is the common interface element that's shared by all of the Office 2019 applications, and it's a component of Exchange 2019, or excuse me, Excel 2019. It is a GUI, or a graphical user interface, and that just means that you can point and click. Now this ribbon has most of the commonly used commands that you'll need to create workbooks, to modify them, to work with the data in them. And the whole idea of the ribbon versus the toolbar was that it would be a quick way to access. In the old days, when you had toolbars and submenus, you could often be hunting around for exactly what you were trying to do. And so instead, with the ribbon, it's arranged in a series of tabs that contain command groups. Those command groups then have a common set of functionality that's just related commands. So you'll have the group here of font, the group of alignment, the group of number, and all of the commands within there are very much related to one another. Okay, so let's go through this slide or this graphic and just talk about these different elements. The tabs organize the ribbon at the highest level, and it's really according to task functions. So like if I'm going to insert objects, or I'm going to work with formulas, or I'm going to be changing the view. So you have the Home tab, the Insert tab, the Page Layout, formulas, data, review, and view. You can see that across the top. And we don't need to go into exactly what is in each one of these. The home is your common things, some of the most common tasks, formatting, different styles, etc. Insert is when you want to, what? Insert something. Okay, you're going to put something in. In the case of Excel, this would be charts, tables, graphics, hyperlinks potentially, headers, footers, things like that. But you're going to insert something. Page layout is where you're going to find themes and effects that you can apply to configure the overall layout. Formulas, specifically if we're working with formulas and functions, we're going to find a lot there. If we're working with external data, we want to import data from other sources or do any sort of data analysis. That's going to be the Data tab. The Review tab is going to be pretty common across Office products. Proofing, adding comments, sharing, it's done, and now we want to review it. And then View is all about how it looks. How are you going to configure this workbook to look? So those are the tabs, and as you hit each one of those tabs, then you are going to be seeing the different command groups. With each command group, or with the vast majority of them, you'll see that little dialog box launcher, like there with the number command group. That just means there are more commands in that command group than can fit in that particular area. And so if you click the dialog box launcher, it will open up a dialog box and you will see all of the options. Across the top, you see that tell me what you want to do. This is a specific feature in 2019, and it is really nice. By typing text into that, Excel will just return, the most relevant search results in a drop-down menu. It updates on the fly as you type into it, and so it is a very, very helpful tool. It's not really help per se. It's actually just taking you right to the command that you want to perform a particular task. All right, so here again are the ribbon tabs, and I'd mentioned all of them except for help at this point. Help, of course, is where we can go to actually search documentation. We can contact support and whatnot for bigger things. So we will go through these ribbons as we continue on. And here's a graphical version of the tell me. That's my fault. So as we type in a search term, you'll see the search results. So for instance, if I typed in insert image, okay, there is it pops up insert picture and then an insert with a bunch of submenus. You're also going to see the last 5 commands that have been executed from searches that appear. So tell me is going to be very useful, just for finding quick access to these commands. You can still get quick access by just learning where they are in the ribbon, but for the time being, if you want to just find it quickly, you can use the tell me what you want to do. Another aspect of the user interface are screen tips and key tips. Now, these are two different things, but similar. Screen tips are small pop-up windows that appear when you put the mouse pointer over commands or sometimes just other elements of the user interface. So it'll pop up and give you some information about, maybe the command's name or what the command or the screen element does. If there's a keyboard shortcut that does the same thing, that's all going to be contained in screen tips. A key tip is an alternate method of executing Excel commands, and that will appear when the user presses the Alt key. Okay, so the screen tip's a little pop-up. The Alt key then makes these other letters appear, and so if I press it's just telling me, okay, now you can actually use your keyboard instead of your mouse to activate these different tabs. All right, so key tips, a lot of us may never use. Screen tips can be very helpful because they provide us with more information. But don't forget you have the quick access toolbar. We mentioned it briefly earlier. It's just another element of the user interface that gives us access to very commonly used commands. There's only a couple of commands on that quick access toolbar by default. That's the save command, the undo, and the redo command. commands. Okay? Undo just is an undo on your last action. If you enter data, it will delete data. If you deleted data, it will add it back. You can just say, oh, I want to undo that. That was a mistake. And then redo is in the reverse, but you can use the Quick Access Toolbar menu button there to customize the Quick Access Toolbar. It should contain whatever you would like it to contain. Okay? It should be making available to you the commands that are most useful to you. Commands that are most useful to you may not be the commands that are most useful to me. So it is customizable for that very reason. There are two other options for accessing certain commands. You have mini toolbars and then context menus. The mini toolbar is displayed when you right-click the active cell on the worksheet. So it's a small rectangular little pop-up box or window, and it just has some editing commands in it. Okay? There are actually multiple versions of this toolbar. The main one is the first there that shows up when you right-click an active cell. And then variations of that are when you right-click other objects within a workbook, like images or charts. You may see slightly different mini toolbars. And then a context menu is just also known as a right-click menu. So when you right-click a particular object or you right-click data within a worksheet, the context menu is displayed, and it shows you a list of commands and options that have to do with working with that specific type of content. Okay? So you have those options as well, and we're going to now get into a demonstration and look at using Excel commands. In this demonstration, we're going to look at using Excel commands, because now that we're familiar with the overall general layout of Excel 2019, we want to look at what some of the commonly used commands are. The first thing I just want to identify is the screen tip. Okay, so you can have whatever tab you want selected, and then as you hover over different commands, you're going to see the screen tip pop up there. It tells me this is going to put things in bold, and Control B is the shortcut. Okay, hover over the color. We get a screen tip that this is the font color, change to the color of your text. And in this case, we have a link that says, tell me more. Okay? As I said, this is going to exist on every one of these tabs. So if we click over to the Insert tab, then we can see that the same is the case for literally every one of these commands. Okay? As you hover over a command in the ribbon, it will give you a screen tip. If I hover over this, it'll say, see all charts. That's going to open up the charts dialog box. And many of these command groups will have that option, as we've already noted. Once that opens up, I'll just close that down. Let's take a look back at the Home tab. This one will be one that you frequently will use. So here we have the font command group, and then we have the font dialog box launcher. When I select that, it opens up the dialog box, and it's just going to give me a greater number of commands to have access to. Okay, so instead of just bold, italics, underline, increasing font, decreasing, changing colors, we're going to get the strike through, the superscript, the subscript. You're going to have those different options, and you can choose heading. Notice we have the font tab. So it's the Format Cells dialog box, but then it's the font tab that is displaying all the options for me. So let's close that down. Then we have the Tell Me box up here. Tell me what you want to do. So again, we can select this, and we can just type in something, like for instance the word symbol, and in this case it says, okay, do you want to insert a symbol? And so we have the symbol, and then you have equation symbols and insert equation, and notice some of these, in this case shapes, just probably because it started with an S, they're going to be commands. Okay, so change font color. Again, you can create, you can add anything that you want in here. So change font color, for instance. And even though I misspelled it, there's font color. All right, so you have those options. Let's go down here. Let's select cell C11, and then I'm going to type and day after. Enter. C12, consider New Year's Eve, and then press enter. Now we're just going to use this to do a replace. I'm going to select cell A2, and we're going to change this to Tuesday, enter, so we've changed that information, and then we'll just go ahead and hit save. Okay. So I can add data to a cell, I can replace data in an existing cell just by selecting the cell and then typing the new values that I would like to have. So that shows us some of the common commands that we would use, as well as editing, replacing information in a cell, like here in A2, and then adding information to an existing worksheet. In this next topic, we're going to look at creating and saving a basic workbook. Okay? Obviously, knowing how to open and work within existing workbooks is important, but undoubtedly you'll need to at some point create your own Excel workbook, and it's likely you're going to be called upon to work with data for a number of different purposes, regarding a number of different subjects. So you might find yourself creating a large number of workbooks. So in this topic, we're going to look at the basics of doing that. Okay, in the Backstage view, which we get to by clicking on the File tab, we have a New tab. And the New tab provides you with a number of different options for creating new Excel workbooks. You can create a new blank workbook and start from scratch, or you can decide to use numerous templates that are going to be available to you. Okay, so in the Start Searching there, or in the search for online templates, you can search for a variety, whatever you want, whether it's budgets or inventory or year-end summaries, or you fill in the blank. Anything that has to do with data input in Excel, there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of templates there. So you can search for those. You can also find templates in your search results. There will be displayed right for you, and there are tiles. You just select one of those tiles, and it will create a new workbook based on that particular template. We do need to discuss file formats, just so you understand the difference between those different file extensions. The default file format for Excel 2019 is the first one, the Excel Workbook, or XLSX, as the file extension. Now, all that means, if you're not familiar with that, is that the file name, like Pat's Workbook, would be the name, and then you would have a period, and then you would have the file name extension. It just identifies to Windows which program is supposed to be used to open this document. Okay, usually not something you have to worry about, and often your computer will be configured to hide that file extension. So don't worry about it. If you just save an Excel 2019 workbook, by default, it'll be saved into that particular format. But there are other formats that are available as well. So the Excel macro enabled workbook, that allows you to save workbook files that contain VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications, or macro code, which just means a code that's actually going to take action. So it will perform some sort of calculation or update some other file. That's something we get into in the more advanced levels. But if you have macros, it'll automatically save it as XLSM. Then you have the binary workbook. This is just a compressed binary-based file format. It reduces file size. It improves performance, especially in your very complex workbooks. It may not be compatible with some types of applications, so that's not one that we use a whole lot. The old style is XLS. That was the previous default format. It's not as compatible with other computer applications as the newer XML-based file format. So unless you're doing this from a backward compatibility standpoint, like you need to open this up in a much older version of Office, which is becoming less and less likely, then you really don't want to use the old format. We have the macro-enabled template. We have the template. These are default formats for macro-enabled templates and just a template in general, and then PDF. You can always save a workbook into the portable document format or PDF, which of course is supported just about anywhere and by a number of different applications. So vast majority of the time we're going to be saving it as an Excel workbook, but we do have other options depending on the data that the workbook contains. Now, when you're in the new, or when you are working in a workbook, I should say, you have two options for saving: save and save as. Save just saves changes to the existing workbook, but doesn't change the file name or the file location. So it will just save it as is. The assumption is that you've already given it a name. Now, if you use save before giving it a name, it will ask you to name it. But once it's named, place, say, in the documents directory, then save is just going to update that file. Save as is for saving new workbook files or making changes to existing files. So if you don't want to save it over top of the original, you can save it as and give it a different name. Okay? And when they say new workbook files, we're talking about the fact that, well, the first time you save, you are going to have to give it a name. You are going to have to specify, where I'm actually putting this file. That's just a part of the process. Here's a look at the Save As screen. It has all the commands and options that you'll use to choose a location. Okay, so on the left there, you have OneDrive and this PC and the ability to add a place. So typically speaking, we're probably going to be choosing this PC, and then we can just browse and decide where to put it. Do notice over on the right you have the current folder, which is just the folder that you use to open this document from. You have any folders that you may have pinned to this area. That's just to make it easier to find them later. So your documents, for instance, you could do that. And then you just have recent folders. And the easiest way to pin a folder is to, go to it, make it one of the recent folders, and then just right-click it and pin it. OneDrive you may use. Windows 10 has OneDrive built into it, and so if you have a Microsoft account, then you get some free OneDrive cloud storage. If you are a part of a company that uses Office 365, then you get a whole ton of OneDrive storage. So it just kind of depends. If you're hooked into that, then selecting OneDrive will place the data into a folder on your machine that is then synchronized with the cloud. So that's actually really good from a backup standpoint. So I would keep that in mind and look to try to get the ability to store your data in OneDrive. Now, when you open a workbook file in 2019 that was created for an earlier version of Excel, it will open in what's called compatibility mode. And so then you'll see in the title bar, you'll see the actual name of the file, but then in braces there, compatibility mode. It does preserve the original file format and gives you, the ability to still work with the data. But if you need to take advantage of some of the newer features in Excel, then you may need to convert. So the convert option is just there to let you take an old file that was created in the XLS format, okay, and convert it to give you access to all the features and functionality that are available in 2019. Often it'll reduce the size of the workbook file. Okay? So from compatibility mode, we would just use that convert option, and that convert option is going to be available to you from the Info tab in the Backstage view. There's another feature called the compatibility checker, which allows you to test the compatibility of objects and data in an Excel workbook. Okay, so if I'm intending to save it in an earlier file format, the compatibility checker is going to tell me, are there going to be some problems? And so we can see once I've activated it that it comes up and it gives me two different levels of compatibility issues. The first is a minor loss of fidelity. That's often just formatting. And then other would be a significant loss in functionality. A significant loss in functionality is going to be calculations that don't work, charts that aren't functioning correctly. And so you always want to keep this in mind, and you want to use it to help you make the decision whether or not to save in that earlier format. In this demonstration, we're going to look at creating and saving a basic workbook. Now that we're more familiar with the user interface, some of the basic commands, it's time to go about creating our own workbook, our own information, as opposed to just editing something, for someone else. So in this example, we have a colleague that's emailed us some basic sales data for 2 new products. We do expect to have more data soon, and so we're going to create a workbook, put in that data, and then save it so that we can add information to it later. So when we click File, we get the Backstage view, and then we're just going to select the new option here, and that's going to be a new blank workbook. All right, and if that's what we want to do as opposed to various templates, then we just select a blank workbook. It's just going to open up a completely new workbook. Notice it's identified as Book 1, and we have a single sheet in this workbook, and that's Sheet 1. So we're just going to go up and add some information. So I'm going to add, this is the product, then hit Tab to advance to the next cell. This is the quantity. Hit Tab again, and here is the price. So just some basic headings. With cell A2 here, our first product is our laptop. All right, we're going to hit Enter to go down. Our next product is our monitor. Okay, and we're going to go down, and we'll just leave it at that for right now. We're going to select, go over to the quantity column, and we're just going to add how many of each of these that we have. So we have 1,550 laptops, and we have 3,125 monitors. Okay, now we're going to go to price. This is real basic. We're not worried about any formatting. We're just putting in our information. So $685 and then $289, the price of each of those items. So once we are set that we have a kind of a good starting point here, we're just ready to save the file. Now, in order to save the file, you can just use the Save button on the Quick Access toolbar, or you can click the File tab. Okay, when you have the File tab, then we select Save. In this case, it is a brand new workbook because it still has the default name. We're going to then say this is where we want to save it. Okay, so I notice I have a number of things here, and I'm just going to save it directly into my documents. That's where it's currently being saved, and then we give it a name. Okay, so My New Products, for instance. All right. Notice the workbook type is XLSX. That is the default workbook unless you are dealing with compatibility issues and maybe have to go back to the old. Generally speaking, we're always going to save it there because that's going to give us access to all of the new Excel features. You click the Save button, and then once it's saved that file, what we'll see Excel doing is changing the title bar, and now it's got the name of your workbook. If you did want to save additional copies, you can just go back to File and you can choose Save As. Okay, so let's say I did want to do one that's in a compatible format. Okay, so I'm just going to call that compatible, and then I'm going to change the drop-down box to say I want to save it as an Excel 97 to 2003 workbook. It just is missing the X on the file extension. But beneath the scenes, behind the scenes, I should say, that changes. And if you have anything in there that isn't compatible with that old version, then you are going to get a warning when you try to do that some of those things might actually be removed. Okay? Now, this is saved. They're both saved. You can click on the file and then close. And it doesn't close Excel, it just closes that particular document. So I still had my old document that I had open at this time. So that's going to complete this demonstration. We just wanted to look at creating and saving a basic workbook. In this next topic, we're going to be looking at entering cell data. Okay, so we need to be familiar with the different data types that Excel accepts and how it deals with it. how it sees data. This is really a very important step into developing the skills that are going to be required for you to use Excel to keep track of important information, to crunch numbers, etc. So we start with a slide that says it's not WYSIWYG. What does that mean? It's not what you see is what you get. It's not that kind of environment, okay? Often the value or the text that appears within a cell is not actually what's stored in the cell. So an example of this is a simple formula that we see on our screen. The active cell shows a value of $452,110. Okay? That's what the active cell is. But that's what the display is. But when I click on it and I look up in the formula bar, I'm going to see the data that's actually in the cell is the equal sign, the word sum, and then in parentheses a cell range. Okay. A data range from C2 to F2. So what is it doing? Well, that's a formula that's just telling Excel, I want you to add the value of cells C2 through F2, and I want you to display the total in this cell. Okay? So that's a great example of a situation where it's not always what you see is what you get. So there are different categories, okay, of data that can be contained within a cell. Now, Excel obviously can have a whole wide array of content, but these are the basic categories of data types. So they can have values. Okay? Data in the active cell can just be a value. It's just a constant. It's numeric usually, or it's text, and it doesn't change unless you edit the cell contents. They can be integers, they can be decimals, they can be money, it can be time, it can be string value for text. Fine, that would be the labels text technically. It's alphanumeric. It's not used to perform calculations, sales, Q1, total. Okay, so the first two are both static, right? Values is actual numerical values, labels and text, that's, words. Then we have formulas. Formulas are mathematical equations that are used to perform calculations or do data analysis. They are dynamic. So the displayed value can change if you change the cell data feeding the formula. Okay, so in our previous example, it was the sum of the cells of C2 to F2. If any of those cells have their data change, then the total is going to change because it's simply adding up all of that data. Dates and times or other types of values, those can be used as simple labels, or those can also be used as a part of a formula, certain mathematical or logical operations. We would potentially be able to use date and time. Now, Excel's a lot different than Word. It's a lot different than PowerPoint, but you are going to find some functionality that's similar. One of those pieces of functionality is the cut, copy, and paste commands. So these exist in every Office program and allow us to move data around. Okay, so cutting. Well, first of all, I have to select a whole cell that I want to work with in order to cut or copy all of the data. Remember, what you see isn't necessarily the data in the cell. Okay, so if I want to get all of the data, just select the cell. If I want a portion of the cell data to cut or copy, I can only do it within the cell if it's in edit mode, and then I'm going to have to go up into the formula bar. Okay, so if there's a big long string, for instance, I want the last two words, then I would have to go and move my insertion point up into the formula bar and highlight those last two words. Same is true of paste. You can paste the clipboard content into an entire cell, or you can paste it alongside other cell content if the cell is either in edit mode or in the formula bar. So cut is actually removing the data from its original location, and then pasting puts it into a new. Copy makes a copy of it, and then that copy will get placed wherever you paste the information. It's important to understand a couple of other ways to move content. And this is in addition to the cut, copy, and paste commands. You can use just drag and drop editing functionality. So it's going to depend on what your cursor looks like as to what mode you're in. So if you place the mouse pointer over the green border anywhere other than above the fill handle, you're going to get that mouse pointer as a move icon. Okay, and that's the first icon there. And you can just click and drag to cut and paste the content. If you press the control key while this is happening, then it will change the mouse to the second one. And noted there, the difference is a copy and paste. Okay, so plus means it's creating a new copy. So just something to know, there's mouse drag and drop functionality that's available to you. Earlier we mentioned the undo and redo commands. Inevitably, as you work with Excel, you're going to make mistakes, so these are going to be very handy to you. Undo will undo a wide variety of actions, which includes entering data, typing text, doing a calculation, inserting an object, applying formatting, all of those. Once you've activated the undo command, then Excel will activate the redo command if you want to put that information back. And as we said, these commands are by default on the quick access toolbar. Excel has another feature that is very, very helpful called the autofill feature. This is just one of the many that makes life easier. Autofill attempts to recognize patterns in the data that you've already entered, and then you can apply that pattern to filling additional cells. Okay, so and it doesn't have to just be as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, E. In this case, we've got tablet 001, tablet 002. Once I type those first couple, then I could click the fill handle and drag it down through additional rows, and you'll see what values Excel is going to place there. All right, so it does really make life a lot easier, and you've got a few different options that you can utilize, but it's a very easy feature to access. Here are the autofill options. Just deciding how to apply autofill. After you release the fill handle, you'll get this little pop-up, and it's just on the lower right-hand side of the range, and it's just providing you with the different options. So what do you want to do? Do you want to fill the series? Fill the series is the default. Okay, so it's just looking for a pattern, and it's applying it. Fill formatting only is applying any formatting in the originally selected cells to the remaining cells, but it's not actually putting content in them. And then fill without formatting does data, no formatting. And flash fill fills in the cells following a pattern in one column. It's based on cells in the same row in other columns. So that one's a little bit different. I skipped the first one. The first one was just copying the content of those cells and actually duplicating it. Let's talk a little bit more about the flash fill. This is a feature that automatically recognizes patterns across rows as the data is entered and then copies those patterns down a column of entries. This is something that is going to require a pretty recognizable pattern, just like the autofill. But you can see here, for an example, we have first names and last names and email addresses. But you think about how much time this can save you. So I've typed in Silva John and then john.silva@developtech.com. Then I've typed in Sandy Maddox and I've typed in that feature. Now the flash fill then says, oh, wait a minute, we're recognizing that these email, this pattern is we're adding the domain name and we're using the values from first name and last name columns. So Excel is actually able to see that you're doing that and then fill it in for you. And again, it'll start to recognize it, and it'll then, give you the option to go ahead and fill that down. So that's definitely one, like I said, to take advantage of because it can save you a whole lot of time. Now, if we're entering data into a worksheet cell, it stands to reason that we might need to delete cell data from time to time. The basic method of doing this is just click on the cell that has the data that you want to remove and then just hit the delete key on your keyboard. But that works 9 times out of 10. Excel also does provide an alternative, and that's the clear command. And the clear command can be useful in some kinds of situations. Clear all is delete everything, so it's the same thing as hitting the delete key. Clear formats, though, only clears the formats, but leaves the actual data. Clear contents is the opposite. It clears the contents, the data, but not the formatting of the cell. Clear comments, clear hyperlinks, remove hyperlinks, and all formatting. So, I mean, those are your different options for the clear command. So you can see that in some cases, let's say I've got a column of monetary values, and so I've got formatting for decimal points and a dollar sign and things like that. Well, I don't want to delete everything. I just want to clear the contents. So I want to clear the contents so that I can re-enter the contents, but I still want the same formatting, and I don't want to have to redo that. So those are situations in which the clear command comes in handy. In this demonstration, we're going to look at entering cell data. So we created that file. It's got some new products that are going to be included in the Devletech catalog, and we need to add some new items. So this is my Devletech holiday schedule. I'm just going to show you a way that you can open up recent files. Okay, this is your recently accessed list, which you can get by right-clicking. Okay, so then I select the file that I want and just choose to open that. Okay, it's opening in the background here, or it'll be in the forefront in a minute. It's just taking a second. So that's all you need to do. We see our file. We see the information that we changed. Now let's look at opening another file. So let's go to File, and instead of New, I'm just going to choose Open. Okay, and then this, again, you can kind of show recent documents and then older documents. Another thing you can do here is click on folders. So this is just workbooks, but what if I have a workbook that's in the same folder as this, but I don't want to go all the way to it? This is going to show me recent folders. And so it actually shows me that folder that I've been in, and then I can go in and choose what I want. Now, in this case, you can also go back a folder level. And so I can click on that folder, and as soon as I do that, it's actually going to say, okay, we're going to get out of the Excel interface. We're going to open up a window here, and then I can see the subfolders. All right, so for instance, I'm going to go down to modifying a worksheet. That's what we're trying to do. And I need a text file. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I take it back. Let's go back to getting started. But instead of looking for that, I'm going to show all files. Here's my future products text. So I didn't realize that wasn't already an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm actually going to do a couple weird things here. I'm just going to right-click and say open that, because I actually need to open that outside of Excel. So let's go back. Here's our new products. And then I got my notepad that's opened up, and so here are the other products. So this is going to be, a scenario where maybe you want to add some information in here. Now I could just type these, but we're also going to highlight, right-click, copy, go over here to cell A4, and then just either right-click or just choose to paste. Okay. And we're going to do this in a couple different ways. When you paste that information in there, you do get this, and you can choose different options. All right, so let's flip back. What happens if we just highlight everything and use Control-C this time to copy? Control-C, go down and click in A5 and hit Control-V. And notice it will go ahead and just copy and paste that information into our text. So those are the new product names. And again, you can choose paste up here. You can use Control-V for copy. You can use the copy option or Control-C. So that's up to you. Let's look now at the autofill feature. Let's say over here we're going to do a product number. So I'm going to create a new field, and I just want to do a random product number for each one. So I'm going to go type 101 and then 102, and I'm going to go like this. Okay, select both of those cells, hold your insertion point till you get the cross there, the thinner cross. And notice the screen tip that's popping up, it's showing me what it's going to do as I drag it up and down. Okay, so that is just going to, it understands that you have a very simple formula there, and then it's just going to do that for you. Now we're going to do, this is a product code. Okay. In cell E2 here, I'm going to go lap-101 and hit enter. And then we're going to utilize the flash fill feature. So as I type M, look what it does. It automatically comes up and says, hey, would you actually like to just make this monitor 102, DES 103? We can hit enter, and Excel will do all of that for us, okay? So just on the fly. So the autofill is you dragging the handle and dragging it down. The flash fill is as you move into subsequent cells, Excel will make a suggestion as to the type of list that we are looking for. All right, so those are some things that we can do in order to edit content in existing workbooks. In this final topic, we're going to look at using Excel help. Now, as you become more familiar with some of Excel's advanced functionality, or just the fact that it's there, it's likely you're going to encounter commands that just require some assistance. Okay, and it's not just you; it's me as well. You could spend a ton of time figuring out how to use these, but help will help you reduce the amount of time that is going to take. So help gives you access to articles that can answer your Excel questions, can show you how to perform certain tasks within the application. It's always checking Microsoft's website for these articles. They can include text, they can include screenshots, they can include video. So really, you can use the old style of hitting F1, or you can just select help and support up in the ribbon. Okay, there's a question mark on the top right of the Excel UI in the backstage view, which will open a web browser. This is the help task pane, and this is what opens up when you select help. Okay? You then type into the search field and click on the search button. Once you do that, your results, your content will be displayed directly beneath there, and then you can just select any of those and it will actually activate that help article. Okay? And then you can just kind of look through and see what it is that you were, or hopefully find the answer to the question that you had. Now, as we've mentioned, Excel has a very robust help feature. It is there to help you with whatever you need. There are multiple ways to get into it. In this demonstration, we're just going to look at some of the basics of using help. Now, as we've mentioned, you do have the tell me what to do here, and so you can type in commands. So I want to use conditional formatting, so I start typing it in. This is not help. Okay, these are actual links to the command. Now, you always do have get help or smart lookup, which is going to basically look up information based on the search term that you've typed in. Okay. So this is one way to get into help. Type something and then go down and say you want to show me the help. Another way would just be to click the search. Okay. Hit F1. So I'm pressing F1 now, and F1 is going to open up the help task pane. Once the help task pane opens, we do have a search dialog box, so I'm just going to search freeze panes. Right? And it's going to show me the results for freeze panes, and I can just simply select one of these options. Now, when you select it, notice down below, you're going to get media. It's going to actually display, if I click play, a video. It's going to give me a description of what this does. It is a feature that we'll be talking about later, all right? But so those are, it shows you all of that. As I said, this is very robust. They do give you step-by-step instructions. They show you, how to freeze and unfreeze, and then you have links to even additional options or additional articles that Excel thinks is related in some way to whatever your search term does. Now, freeze panes is just about freezing rows and columns as you scroll so that you can always see the column headers. The important thing is not freeze panes. The important thing is help. All right, so F1 opens a help, and then you can get help on just about anything you want. Okay, so the formula bar, for instance, if I search help for that, display or hide formulas is coming up, overview of formulas in Excel, all kinds of information. So huge online repository, but built into the Excel user interface. Help is always a keystroke away. It is F1. Otherwise, it's available here by putting in your search term and then just choosing to view help on that topic. In this chapter, we looked at getting started with Office Excel 2019. We discussed just kind of navigating the Excel user interface and the various aspects of that user interface. Talked about command groups in the ribbon and using Excel commands along with finding them. We looked at creating and saving a basic workbook. Also just modifying a workbook by entering data into cells. And then finally using the help system that is included with Excel if you're stuck and need a little assistance. So collectively, these should get us started with using this very powerful program known as Microsoft Office Excel 2019. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at performing calculations. This is really where the power lies in Excel 2019, because you don't just get to enter data, but it actually analyzes your data and performs calculations on the data. So that gets us into formulas and functions. And those are going to be the topics that we cover in this chapter. In this first topic, we're going to look at creating worksheet formulas. You can imagine if you're trying to maintain a spreadsheet that has financial figures that constantly change, that every time a value changes, you'd have to go and change whole rows or columns of data. Well, that would be very difficult to keep up with manually, if not nearly impossible. And so Excel will just do it for me, because we can use formulas so that we're not actually inputting the data into the cell. We're saying to obtain this data from elsewhere. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this topic. So let's start with just defining a formula. A formula is just an equation. It's an equation that can perform simple mathematical computations. It's an equation that can perform very complex mathematical computations. Okay? We can figure out commission rates. We can apply tax to sales. We can calculate totals, for quarterly values. Remember, in Excel, as we've discussed before, what you see isn't necessarily what you get. All right? So when I have a formula in the worksheet cell, then by default, Excel is going to display the result of calculating that formula. So the formula will be found up in the formula bar, but the cell will contain the displayed results. Formulas can use fixed numbers, or they can use reference values to other cells. In this case, you see in the formula bar, we're adding A2 plus B2 to get the total that's displayed in C2. So that formula bar allows you to, put information into a cell. I mean, you can also just click on the cell itself, but the formula bar is just an alternative option. It's also useful for quickly inserting pre-existing formulas. To the left of the formula bar, you have the Insert Function button, and there are going to be a number of different functions that appear there. If you use that, you have the Enter button, which is essentially the same thing as pressing Control-Enter. It just enters whatever content's in the active cell and keeps the cell active. Okay? And then you have Cancel, which would undo any changes that you've made to the cell. It's still going to keep it active. Here's a basic mathematical formula, and it kind of helps us with just the essential elements of Excel formulas. The first rule in Excel formulas is that every single formula begins with an equal sign. Now, this may seem a little bit counterintuitive, okay, because usually I'm used to seeing 2 plus 2 equals 4. Well, here I would see equals sum 2 plus 2, for instance. So you are actually entering the expression side of a formula after the equal sign. And the equal sign essentially just says we're using a formula here, okay? It's an operator, if you will. So this is obviously a basic formula, and we've got some different components to this formula. So the equal sign defines the cell content as a formula. We already said that. You have constants like numbers and text that don't change unless they're manually altered, in this case the 10. You have variables, all right, which is, in this case, the X. That's variable data. That could also be a reference to another cell that would be considered variable data because we don't know whether or not the data in the other cell is going to change. And then we have mathematical operators, plus, minus, multiplication, and division, okay? Division would be a forward slash, multiplication would be the asterisk. You can put items in parentheses, and that does change the order of operation, right? So we could see that happen. So that's a basic mathematical formula where you have that expression. Now we're going to look at this in terms of an Excel formula. Okay, so in Excel formulas, we have the constants. It's the same. Those are numbers and text that don't change. We have the references, okay, like A1, B2, F3. They're telling you to use it's telling Excel, to use the data in that particular cell. And then they start out with the equal sign. Still use operators, okay? So in this case, instead of A1 plus 100 equals, we have equals A1 plus 100. So the data in that cell, the current active cell, will be whatever the value is of A1, add 100 to it. That's what Excel is going to display to you. There's an order of operations, and this does matter. It makes a difference, especially when we start to get into more complex formulas, okay? And the good thing here is it's the same as it's just the order of mathematical operations. This isn't something special Excel is doing. This is just the way that mathematical operations are arranged. And so parentheses are always evaluated first. They have the highest precedence. So anything that is done within parentheses will be evaluated first. So in this case, A2 plus B2 would be added together. Then they would be taken to the power of 2, okay, in the case of an exponent, which is not overly common, but when you have exponents, that will come after the parentheses. Then multiplication and division, and then addition and subtraction. Okay? Excel will read left to right if the operations are at the same order of preference. If you want to, the key to take from this is that if you're wanting to alter the order, obviously the easiest way to alter the order is to do what? To add parentheses. So if something needs to be done before everything else is done, then we are going to add parentheses, and this becomes very helpful to understand. Mathematical operators aren't the only type of operator that you're going to use to work with data in workbooks. There are 4 different kinds of operators, reference operator being one of them, and they are one of the most important. Basically, they just tell Excel which cell or range of values to use as variables, okay? So this is in the situation where we say, okay, equals the sum of C2 colon F2. We know that means the colon is a range operator. So it says all of the cells in a range between the 2 references, A1 to A10, all the values from A1 to A10. Okay, whereas if you use a comma, it's individual values. It's a union operator, and so it's each reference in the series, and this is if they're not contiguous, they don't reside right next to one another. And then you can use a space too. The space is an intersection operator, so it's looking for a value in the cell where the 2 ranges intersect. So in this case, A9 to J9, E2 space, E2 to E22. Excel is then looking for the value in the cell where those 2 ranges intersect, which in this case would be E9, and it will grab just that one. Now that one's a little less common. The colon and the commas are probably your most common reference operators. This is just a visual of that particular example. Okay, so A9 to J9 space, E2 to E22, and it's looking at that intersection. It would display the value of cell E9. 84,000 is what would be actually displayed in that cell. All right, in this demonstration, we're going to get started working with worksheet formulas. In our example, we have some plans. Develotech, the company, has some plans to release these 5 new products: desktops, phone, tablet, smart TV, and VR HMD. And we want to analyze some projected sales figures to try to figure out how much money the company can plan to profit from these new items. So we have the products here, and then we have the sort of some sales estimates, okay, or this is estimated sales, excuse me, and then we've got tax and things like that. So we're going to do some formulas here. First one, sales before tax, all right, and so we just basically need to total up these cells B2 to B6. Now, one way of doing that would just simply to go up here and say equals. Remember, that tells Excel that we want it to do a calculation, and then just B2 plus B3 plus B4, and you can notice what it's doing as I do this, and you can also gather that that's probably not the most efficient way of doing it. Okay, when we're done with that, we're just going to hit Control Enter, and it automatically calculates, and we see up in the formula bar we've got the actual formula, but then down below we have the results. Okay, so that is the total of just adding those sales. And that's one way of doing it. Okay, another way of doing it would have been go to B2, then a colon, then B6. So basically we're just saying add up that whole option, but if we see in this case that doesn't actually get the value that we want. So in that case, maybe something didn't work, right? So we can say sum, and I'm just going to do that as opposed to, we'll talk about this more later. I'm just going to do that as opposed to going and manually typing B2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 again, all right? Now let's go down here. We are going to calculate the non-taxable phone fees, which is 5% of the phone's sales. Okay, so we select B9, and then we're going to say this is equal to cell B3 times, so the asterisk, 0.0, let's go 0.05. Right? And that'll mark that, and so we've got that value. Now calculating sales with tax, we're going to put that in B11, and then we're going to go up and just go ahead and type that equals, and then remember we can use parentheses and things to modify. So we want to go B8 minus B9 because I don't want to calculate the non-taxable phone fees. So I need to take the sales before tax and subtract the non-taxable phone fees. Subtraction comes after division and multiplication, so I actually need to put parentheses around that. All right, so we're going to grab that value first, then we're going to multiply it by B10, which is our tax rate. Okay, of 8%, and then we're going to add that to B8. So we're going to take B8 minus B9, collectively get a value for that. We're going to multiply that value times B10, and then we're going to add that to B8 to get the result. So the result here is your sales with tax, $423,718.64. So then our next calculation would be to configure what our profit is. Well, we could see we've got the sales with tax, and then we have our expenses, so it stands to reason that our profit is going to be B11 minus B12, right? We're going to take the profit, and then we're going to calculate the estimated profit. Actually, though, I don't want to do the tax because I'm not getting the tax. We want to do it before tax, so B8 minus B12. That's going to give us our estimated profit. We're going to go ahead and click Save on this, because I just don't want to save it over top the original, so I'm going to say Save As, and we're just going to add the word My to the front of that. Hit Save. All right, and those are our changes. So we can see in this demonstration how to just work with some simple formulas, how to calculate this. In this case, it's a sum function, but before we just basically said add B2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we did some multiplication here, okay, B3 times 0.05%. We did some subtraction, and we did a little bit where we had to actually, essentially come up with a rate, so we had to calculate some values there. In this next topic, we're going to look at inserting functions. You've learned about the usefulness of basic formulas, but at some point we're going to have to use more complex formulas. So instead of just adding these two cells or multiplying the data from these two cells or add 100 to this cell, we're talking more complex types of things. All right? It'll let you focus more on the information you need to extract from the data and let us focus less on the mathematical operations themselves. So functions are simply predefined, pre-existing formulas that you can insert into an Excel worksheet. All right? Like all formulas, the functions begin with an equal sign. Unlike them, it's followed by the function name and then a set of arguments, and those arguments are found in parentheses. Okay, so if I wanted to just add the values of B2 to E2, I could do that just by specifying, I want a B2 plus C2 plus D2. Instead, we go equal sum. This is the sum function, and then the arguments are contained within those parentheses. You just put, in this case, a range of cells. We want to add this up, and then the function result is displayed in that particular cell, in this case F2. Okay, sum function is a very common one. There's other functions, though. EXP function you could use to calculate exponential expressions. There are hundreds of functions, and every function has its own particular purpose and has its own set of arguments. You can use the Formulas tab to get access to the function library group. This is a central location for accessing all the available functions in Excel. Also provides you access to the Insert Function button, which is the same one as what you have in the formula bar, but this is just the larger list. All right, and they come in various categories. They will come in the recently used is the first one there. That's just any functions that you've recently used. And then financial, logical, that's functions that are trying to help determine if an argument is true or false or if it meets other logical conditions, whereas financial obviously is for, monetary figures. Text are functions that change text values, like capitalizing all your letters or putting everything in lowercase. Date, time, lookup, and reference. These are functions that allow you to look up a particular cell value or reference from a range. Math and trig are more complex mathematical formulas, and then more functions is just, higher level, less commonly used functions. Engineering, statistical functions, things of that nature. So you're going to have the commonly used ones readily accessible to you, and then you're going to have to dig a little for some of the others. When you use the insert function dialog box, it allows you to search for and insert into cells of any of the available functions. All right, so I can actually do insert function and then type search, and then it will display the functions that match that search criteria for me. And then once it does that, I can, specify the, or I can go ahead and insert it. Sorry, you'll get a description. You'll get a description of the arguments as well, and then you will be able to insert it. So the search for a function field is just where your text goes. You can also select a category in the drop-down box, and then in that details area, you can select the individual function. Once you select an individual function, then you will have displayed for you the function arguments dialog box. Okay, this is if you use the insert function. So it says, well, you're going to insert this function and it requires a couple of arguments, so it opens up the function arguments dialog box and you can just enter those arguments in. Just one way of doing it. Okay, so we can type in, okay, these are our numbers. We have to have one, that's required, it's in bold. Everything else is optional. As you put in the value, the cell reference, notice it shows the value. You also have a function description. You get some information about the arguments. You get the formula result. It's kind of displaying all of this as you're going along. So it's a graphical way of entering in all of this data and then immediately seeing the results. Excel provides another useful graphical method for entering cell and range references for different purposes, like using in formulas and functions. Basically, whenever you need to enter a cell or range reference, you have the option of typing it manually, or you can select it graphically. Okay, and that's why that function arguments dialog box had the collapse dialog buttons, because they would minimize the dialog box. It would take you back to the worksheet, and then you can just graphically select. So as opposed to me putting in the cell references, I can graphically select them just by clicking and dragging. Another feature that's extremely useful is the auto sum feature. The most common mathematical calculation that's done by Excel is just adding up all of the values in a row or adding up all the values in a column. So auto sum allows you to do that. Basically you can click a single button to get the auto sum and then press enter or tab, and it'll insert the sum function into the active cell. So, it automatically tries to guess which cells you want to add up. It'll go to the left or go, within that particular column. You can obviously always go and change that. In this case, if I was in F2, it would have accurately chosen to add the numeric values from B2 to E2 for me when using the AutoSum function. The AutoSum button provides you with quick access to some other commonly used Excel functions as well. So when you select the drop-down menu, it's going to display this menu that allows you to insert one of the other functions: sum, average, max, minimum, count, just the number of values that are in the cell. So, and then you can hit more functions, and then I'll take you to the functions dialog box. The point is just these are some quick access to some of the most commonly used ones. Now let's talk about the basic function syntax, because in order for us to understand how it works, you really do have to understand the syntax. It's just the structure that's necessary so that we can express the function, we can define the arguments. Pretty easy, okay? It always starts with an equal sign. So the equal sign just tells Excel that a function is coming. Okay? Then it's the function name in its entirety. Okay? So sum, max, min, average, those are the ones that we've seen. And then in parentheses, you have the arguments. Now, functions can have both required arguments as well as optional arguments. The optional arguments are always noted in the syntax by using brackets. Okay, so if something's in square brackets, then it's an optional argument. So for sum, for max, for min, you're always going to have you have to have one. You have to have one number that's required. But you can add additional numbers if you'd like. So here we can see that in the arguments we're taking first a range, B2 to B6. The next value is the data in C4, and the next value is a constant value of 100. And the function's just going to return the max value of all of those. Okay. If you were using the sum function, if that said sum instead of max, then it would be adding up the values. First of that range, then C4, then adding 100. So, you can see what you're doing. Commas are separating the different variables. So if you have a range, don't separate it with commas. If you separate it with commas, it's just grabbing the value from those individual cells. The formula autocomplete feature is a more dynamic feature that basically anticipates the function that you're going to want to use in the cell. It happens when you type in the equal sign. So as soon as you type in the equal sign, you're telling Excel we're going to put in a function, and so Excel will then do what this does, and that's just pop up all kinds of functions. All right. Now in this case, you've started to type, and it's doing almost an auto. It is doing an autocomplete. Sometimes we call it IntelliSense. It's seeing what you've written and then showing you all the functions that start out that way. Okay, and so that can just make it a little bit easier for you to find the function that you need. We also have the arguments tooltip that you want to be aware of. Okay, this is essentially just a little tooltip that pops up as you are typing in arguments. So notice as soon as I hit the comma now, number 2 is in bold. Now it's in square brackets, so that's telling me it's optional in this case, but I'm in the current position. So the arguments tooltip will kind of, as you're walking through entering in the data for the function, it tells you where you're at, and it identifies what kind of argument you have to be dealing with. In this demonstration, we're going to look at inserting functions into a worksheet. Now, the example here is that we have a sales contest that's going to be used to reward the best performing sales rep. So we have this worksheet that stores and performs calculations on sales figures for each of the reps. We want to try to analyze these numbers. We have to determine exactly which sales reps are going to win the prizes. And so in order to do that, we're going to calculate each rep's total sales, then their average quarterly sales, and then the highest and lowest quarterly sales. All right, so we've already got sales contest open, and we want to do the total sales for our sales rep. So notice each row is an individual sales rep. We've got quarter 1 through 4, then we've got a total. So here in the total, cell F4, we're going to say equals. Actually, let's do this. Let's go to the formulas, and then we're going to use the auto sum function. Okay? So we choose auto sum. Notice it automatically is analyzing the data set. It sees everything to the left, so it just inserted equals sum B4 to E4. You just hit enter and say, yes, I'm going to accept that as a value. Now we can do the exact same thing here and hit enter. And that'll do that calculation. So there we have the first 2, which is basically just saying sum the preceding 4 columns in that row and give me the total. Now for the next one, we want to do the average. So the next value is average. I'm going to go equals and just type AV, and notice that Excel brings up, it auto-completes everything that you want. Now I just hit tab, it filled in that formula, and then it asked me for my arguments. So you see there the arguments, so again it's just going to be B4 colon E4. We're just going to say everything within that range. Right? Once that's done, we hit enter, and there you go. There's our average. Do the same thing. You can double click too, and if you double click, it does the same thing. So I hit tab or double click, and in this case, it's B5 to E5. We do the closing parentheses, otherwise you'll get an error there. All right, and that's giving you your average. Okay. Now let's say we want to do the highest quarterly sales for those 2 sales reps. So we're going to go to formulas, and then we have the ability here to go to our function library and insert a function. Notice this is just the insert function dialog box. Here I can type a description of what I want, hit go, and it will search the available functions to show me a function that matches. So there's my max function. We're just going to hit OK. And then notice now it opens up and asks me for the function argument. So what are our different arguments? And one option you have here is to select the arrow next to number 1, and it's just to collapse. And then basically at that point, it allows us just to, choose the range. So B4 to E4. Okay, and then we are just going to expand it. So that's number 1 and number 2. Again, collapse. We want to evaluate these, expand, and hit OK. And then it will show you the highest value. Now notice that's the highest value in all of those ranges, and it happens to be here in cell D5. Okay, but you basically just told it, here's 2 ranges. I want you to show me the maximum number in each of those ranges. Or rather, across both of those ranges. Now let's do the lowest quarterly sales. Okay, lowest quarterly sales, so let's go back to insert function. In this case, we can either just find it or we'll type minimum. And there we have the minimum function, or min. Okay, we're going to choose our ranges. And notice, obviously, you don't have to do that. We can just say B5 to E5. You can just type in those values and hit OK. And then it's going to show me the lowest values. The lowest value here was Silva, equator to 65,500. Okay, so those are just some basic calculations that can be performed, some basic functions. And so that's going to complete this demonstration. This next topic, we're going to look at reusing formulas and functions. Okay, a lot of times I'm not coming up with things brand new. I'm going through existing data, and so I want to create a formula and be able to reuse it. I want to reuse functions, and that's what we're going to be discussing in this topic because it's going to help you make life easier. All right, as with other worksheet content, if you want to reuse your Excel formulas and functions, you can do so, and you can do so just by using the cut, copy, and paste commands. Okay? By default, if a cell contains a formula or function, and you cut or copy its content to the clipboard, when you paste it into another cell, Excel is going to paste the formula. All right, this goes right back to it's not the what you see is what you get in type of environment. What you're displaying is a result, not the formula. But if you copy it and paste, you will be copying and pasting the formula. But that actually is functionality that's going to help us to reuse it. So that's actually exactly what we want, although it might not have been what you were expecting. So here we have the paste options, and I'm sure some of you have pasted information into other programs like Word or PowerPoint. But with Excel, we have a larger number of paste options because there's going to be occasions when we just want to paste certain elements of the cell, but not the contents, the formatting, the numerical result without bringing the actual formula, all kinds of stuff. So there are numerous options that we have in the paste options. We can paste just the formula. We can paste the formula and the number formatting. We can keep source formatting. We can eliminate borders. We can just grab the values, not the formulas, the values and the formatting, just the formatting. I mean, it's kind of easier as you go through. You can see a number of different options. It's not going to be quite as confusing as that probably made it sound. It is essentially just going to be dependent upon the situation. What are you trying to do in this particular situation? What data would you like to bring over, and what data would you like to leave? Often what happens is we paste it in and we go, oops, that's wrong, and then you use the undo option, and the second time you go back and choose the correct option from the paste options button. We also can choose paste special, and paste special is going to provide us with a number of other options. Some of the same options obviously are here as well, but there are different options. So you can paste formulas, values, formats, comments, the operation that we want to do. You've got column widths on there, transposing, pasting a link to a particular cell as opposed to the actual data itself. Okay, so there are several different options that are available with the Paste Special dialog box. Now, before we look at cutting and copying and pasting to reuse formulas, we need to understand how cell and range references work. In Excel, there are three types of references: relative, absolute, and mixed. A relative reference is a cell or range reference that changes relative to the location of the cell. So when you move or copy the formula from one cell to another, the original function was A1 to C1, and then if you are copying that function, it is going to modify the row value, right? It's smart enough to just say, okay, well, it was relevant. All it really didn't mean specifically A1 to C1. It just meant the three cells to the left of this cell. That's what we were adding. So Excel sees that, and when you copy the function, it modifies it, so it will still be adding the three cells to the left of this cell. Okay? In this case, it's just a different three cells. So that's a relative reference, but an absolute reference is a cell or range reference that doesn't change when a user moves or copies a formula from one cell to another. Now, we have to tell Excel to do this. It's not automatically going to do absolute references, but if you want a part of a calculation to include a value in a specific cell, then you have to do this, all right? For example, sales figure by the sales tax rate, a sales rep total sales by the commission rate. You've got some constant value that's contained in a cell. Then I'm going to do an absolute reference. All right, the absolute references are listed by putting a dollar symbol before the row header and before the column header. If you ever see that, that is an absolute reference. So we can see when copying it, the relative reference of D2 changed to D3, but the absolute reference did not change. We also have mixed references, and these are a cell or range reference that just includes both. Okay, and so we've got, maybe it's a fixed column header, or it's a fixed column, or it's a fixed row. So instead of having dollar symbols before both the column and the row, you just have it in one place. So that would be a mixed reference. And, again, it's one part of it doesn't change. Whatever part is noted as the absolute part, that's the part that is not going to change when you copy and paste that formula into another cell. We can also autofill formulas. Just like you autofill data, you can click your fill handle and you can drag it. If there's a formula, say there in F2, then it will just copy the formula. It'll change the relative references, and that's it. That's a real quick and easy way to do it. You can double-click the fill handle, but that only applies to columns, and it'll copy to the first empty row if there's data missing. So a couple different options: click and drag, or just go down to the bottom and double-click that fill handle. That will utilize autofill to copy those formulas. There may be times in your formulas and functions where you need to make reference to a specific worksheet. So far, we've simply referenced other cells within the same worksheet. But you actually have the ability to reference cells in other worksheets and technically in other workbooks. But we will talk about that in more detail later. We'll talk about this in more detail later, but just in case you ever see it, that's what that means. So right there within the function, we have sheet 2. That's going to be whatever the name of sheet 2 is, followed by an exclamation point. That is the worksheet reference in its entirety, and then the individual cell reference from that particular worksheet. Sometimes you will be entering and reusing data in worksheets, and so you might encounter an error, especially if you're dealing with formulas. And so we need to just understand why this happens and what it looks like, and we'll talk about this a bit more later. But the most common display is the one that we see there, and that is just a column width issue. It's railroad tracks or hashtags, if you or number signs, depending on your age, probably. Basically, this is just telling you, hey, the values are too big, it can't fit, so it's not truncating them at all, and it's just showing you this. All you have to do is just click and drag the column headings or the column itself until it is large enough to display. Okay, and then you would see that the issue has been corrected. Now, you do have others. There are the value error, where Excel is expected to find one type of value and it's found a different type of value. Division by zero, an inaccurate reference, the ref error. A null value is another potential error. So you will see some of those as you go along, and you just need to understand, what it is. So if, for instance, division by zero, you're trying to do division by zero. The reference error means that there's an invalid reference. So there's something wrong with one of the cells that your formula is referencing. So if you know the error, then you can kind of hunt down the root cause. So here's an example where we see the exclamation sign, and it's telling me, it's got a little green triangle as well in the top left of the active cell. That is, there's error indicator there. What's it telling you? Well, it's just inconsistent formula. Okay. In this case, there's something wrong with the formula, and it was recognizing that it wasn't consistent with the formulas above it and beneath it. And so you can get help on the error, you can ignore the error, you can edit in the formula, you can copy the formula from above. That's probably what we would need to do in this case. It just depends. Now, your options there are going to be dependent upon the actual error itself. In this demonstration, we're going to look at using formulas and functions. We've started with some analysis of sales figures, and we need to finish this so we can announce the contest winners. We're going to reuse the functions that we've already created for these first two sales reps, that being Silva and Maddox. So we totaled, we averaged, we looked at the maximum and the minimum value, and so rather than creating new functions for each one, we're going to try to copy here. I'm going to try to copy this information. So first off, let's select cell F5, okay? And I'm just going to use Control-C. So Control-C, it copies. Notice it changes the outline of that. And then we're going to select ranges F6 all the way down to F27, okay? And then once I have selected that, I'm going to hit Control-V. So what it is doing, you can go check, is it's smart enough to see that it's just going to grab each individual one, okay? So it's just, the only thing that's changing is the row, and that's one way to do that. Another way to do that would be the autofill feature. Okay? So I can select on average, and I notice the fill handle here. Get my thin cross, drag that down, and now the same thing has happened with the average function, row by row. Right? That is the autofill feature. Okay, so that was that's fine. We can now also use the autofill feature to fill in the highest and lowest quarterly sales figures down the remaining cells in column H and I. Just do the exact same thing. As you can see, that really is a very easy way of doing this. Just click and drag. And again, if you want to check, that's fine. You can also just double-click that autofill handle and notice it just copied it throughout the rest of that column. So pretty cool, very very minimal effort that is going to be required to do that. So now let's deal with this commission rate. Okay? The commission rate is going to be based on our total, obviously. Okay, so this is F4, and so we're going to start by just saying equals F4, and then we're going to multiply that by M3. Excel highlights the cell. We can see that's where the commission rate is. Hit enter. So that's going to calculate the commission rate for Silva. We'll go over here to our autofill. We'll double click, and didn't work in that case, did it? Okay, because look what we have. We have F5 times M4, which actually should be okay. Or would appear okay, but as I start to click down here, notice what's happening. M4, M5, M6. Wait a minute, though. This was an actual value that we had. We didn't need, and that's why it's returning that value. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to then create an absolute reference. So we want to say, I want to make that an absolute reference. We put dollar signs, then hit enter. Okay. Now, if we double click to autofill, it works correctly because it never changes cell M3. It just changes what it's calculating before that. So that's the importance of that type of reference, that absolute reference in these kinds of situations. Because with it, your autofill features are going to save you a great deal of time. Without it, they're going to copy incorrect formulas. So that's going to finish this demonstration where we just looked at performing some basic calculations and reusing formulas and functions. In this chapter, we looked at creating Excel formulas and functions. We inserted those functions into cells. We talked about reusing formulas and functions in other cells. And these are basic tasks that are going to be really the foundation of your ability to work with organizational data and to analyze organizational data. It helps us to extract intelligence from the data and make sound business decisions because of all the mathematical features in Excel 2019.